Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Noble County's Farm Talk Breakfast. My name is Christine Gelly. I'm the Agriculture and Natural Resources Extension Educator here. And I see that we have a lot of people joining us this morning that aren't from Noble County. So welcome virtually to Noble County. This is a program that we do once a month. We try to keep it on the third Friday of the month. Usually it's a breakfast meeting and keep it to a 1 hour event where we can talk about a current issue or trend or just share some general information that can be helpful for your home or your farm. And today's topic is Let's Talk Taters, all about potatoes today with my colleague Gigi Neal. And Gigi has the same position as I do, but in Clermont County. So it's pretty special that we're able to welcome her from that part of the state here this morning, and none of us had to travel. Gigi, thank you for joining us this morning. I will hand it over to you to begin our presentation.
Well, thank you, Christine. And if I did have to travel, I probably would have left here about 4 o'clock this morning to get to you. So glad we didn't have to do that. But yeah, we're going to talk some potatoes today. And when she asked me to present this, I'm like, what in the world could I talk about on March 19th? I was like, oh, well, that's right after St. Patrick's Day. So that happens to be, and we're going to talk about that here in a little bit. This is kind of the rule of thumb to plant potatoes in Southern Ohio. And so then we're going to talk a little bit more about not only potatoes, but what types of potatoes can we use, and how do we do it, and why do we have to put them in the hills, and why do we have to just keep an eye out on them for other items that pop up throughout the year. So just a few things we're going to talk about today. And one of those is going to be the site selection of common kinds of potatoes. What is a seed potato versus a food potato? When is the best time to set those potatoes out? Where do I find seed potatoes and how do I set them? And can I use containers instead of a garden? This is a unique way to do it. And then the other one is there really a rainbow of potatoes? And then we're going to finish up with recipes. I did get up this morning and make my favorite recipe of potatoes, and we'll share those here in just a little bit. So site selection of common kinds of potatoes. Well, the very first thing you want to do, regardless of whether it's potatoes, flowers, vegetables of any kind, don't guess, soil test, please. So regardless of where you are in the state, contact your extension office. And you can do that by going to whatever the county name is. So for example, for me, it will be clermont.osu.edu. For Noble County, it will be noble.osu.edu, and find that contact information, which if you're on this call today with us, this presentation, you have been in contact with your local extension office in some manner. So they can assist you in getting that soil sample and making sure that your soil has got the right nutrients, it has the appropriate pH level, and everything is going to be as best as possible to plant the crop that you want. So some examples are here on how to actually take a soil sample, whether it's with a soil probe or with a hand spade. And as you can tell in both of those, there are some organic matter items that are there. We don't want those organic items, so that upper grass layer or those bottom roots that are down in the hand spade, we don't want those to be present in our sample, because that will actually throw off the soil sample and cause it to have additional organic matter that it really doesn't have down in that 4 to 6, even 8-inch range where we are wanting our plant roots to grow. The next thing is we want to talk about is the site selection. We want to be sunny. So they do like to have full sun. You also want the soil to be loose, well drained, slightly acidic. And sorry, but my slightly acidic is hiding behind the sun today. Poorly drained causes a poor stand and low yields. And then also heavy soils cause small and rough tubers to grow. The other thing is finding well-drained, slightly acidic soil, well-drained soil. Do we have a lot of that in Southern Ohio? No. But we can find it. We can adapt it. In Noble County, you probably have about the same thing because we're both on that Appalachian chain of hills, and you got to be able to adapt and adjust your soil as best as possible. So you might have to help loosen it up by adding some different products to help loosen that soil up. Some of the different types of potatoes that we eat, and these are the most common ones. Red skin potatoes, of course, they're good for pairing with meats and veggies. They're lower in starch. They do have a somewhat of a waxy texture, so they're good for best to boil. You can roast them. You can use them in salads, soups, and stews. So they're very versatile. They also do come in round, oblong, or oval, and I'm sure most of you have seen or even eaten these at potato salad and things like that. There is a European kind, and it has more of a yellow flesh, and it is a little nuttier in its flavor. White skin potatoes, they can be either high or low in starch. Now, if they're high in starch, they're going to probably be a little more mealy. So those are probably better for chipping and frying. Or if they're low, they're better for waxing and boiling or even roasting. They are white flesh, but they can come in shades of yellow also. They are very versatile and one of the most popular kinds in North America. Now, russet, this is probably the ones that we use the most of. They are brown skin, they're oblong. These are the ones that we usually use for French fry, hash browns, those types of things, because they have a drier content. They are low in sugar, so they fry up easier. Now, another thing I should have mentioned earlier, reading an article yesterday coming through my extension email, we have what's called a safety net group down here. And so they put out all this information for food pantries, people in need throughout the community. One of the items that came through yesterday was 40,000 pounds. That's a lot of taters, if you really think about it. 40,000 pounds of potatoes are coming into our area, and they're trying to get them distributed into the different food pantries and shelters and places like that. So a local school, it helps to run this organization that brings these different items in, and they're putting them out into 50-pound bags, so out into the community. So there are going to be 40,000 pounds of red potatoes that are going to be out in the southwest corner, going out into the community. So that's a good thing that's happening. But think about it, that's a lot of potatoes coming in. So
Gigi, we have the same thing here too in Southeast Ohio. We have a potato distribution coming out of Athens, and we will be bringing some into Noble County for our seed library that we'll be starting this spring too. So really excellent opportunity.
And that's something we'll talk about here in a little bit, is the nutritional factor that comes from a potato. So they're better for us than what people think. So we'll come to that here in a little bit when we talk about nutrition. It goes along with it. So what's the difference? What's the difference between a seed potato and a food grade potato? Seed potatoes they're certified, they're small, they have been grown under certain conditions so that they can produce the roots, the tubers that come out of them that will eventually grow into being the plant. And copied and pasted something in there in the middle, didn't catch it, sorry. Food potatoes, the ones that we actually eat, the ones that we either grow in our gardens or we get in the grocery store, these have been grown from those certified seed potatoes. If we get them in the grocery store, a lot of times they have been treated with some sort of product that helps to keep the tubers from growing. So the eyes do not grow, and so they will not grow into those plant systems. Now, if you have them out in your home garden and you keep them in the house for a longer period of time, and I have even seen the grocery store versions do this too, but they are best not suited because even though those tubers do grow on them, they may not turn into a true plant or be that productive of a plant in the future as it's growing. So what is the best time to set those potatoes? Well, I kind of hinted at that at the very beginning. St. Patrick's Day. So we just had that the other day. So we are in the perfect time frame to be planting and setting our potatoes. Now, Ohio had anywhere from a zone 6 to a zone 5A. So here in Southern Ohio, where I am along the river, we're in a 6A. You guys are a little further north and east, even though you are considered Southwest, you're further north and east than I am. So you're probably closer to that 5 mark, maybe just the 6 mark, but we're all, I mean, either one of these USDA zones is, you can pretty much grow about anything into it. You just have to watch your frost line. So the rule of thumb on St. Patrick's Day is that the soil does need to be dry. And the other thing to think about is, when is your last frost? The last frost down here, another rule of thumb, is usually Mother's Day, so mid-May. So then we want to go back a couple weeks before our last frost, and then we can plant our potatoes. So we got anywhere from now, St. Patrick's Day, to probably the beginning, no later than the middle of April, to get a good crop of potatoes out. And the same thing for the further north you go in Ohio, we're looking more at that mid-April timeframe to be planting, or once again, 2 to 3 weeks before the last frost date. So we talked a little bit about the potatoes from the store. Potatoes are a no-no to use from the store. The ones that have been purchased or from our grocery stores, they're, as I said, they're treated with an inhibitor so that the tubers do not grow. They don't really necessarily form a healthy plant in the future. So we want to make sure that we are getting our seed potatoes from a reputable company. So your local home and garden centers, your farm supply stores, you can order them and have them shipped directly to your place. But you want to make sure that you are getting a good quality, a good quantity of seed potatoes also. So when we talk about how in the world do we cut these, because we're not talking about getting potatoes like we go to the restaurant and we get this giant potato, baked potato, and we put all this butter and sour cream and everything on it. And it's like the size of a football. They're huge. Those are not the ones we're talking about. We're talking about potatoes that are probably anywhere from 3 to 5 ounces. So they're smaller in size, more the size of an orange or a baseball. And we're going to cut them down into smaller pieces. So we're talking about that size being 1.5 ounces, or roughly the size of a golf ball. That's why the golf ball picture's here. And we also want to make sure that there are 2 to 3 eyes, because the eyes that are on the potato are actually what the plant system is going to grow from and develop its roots and develop our plant from it. So here's an example of how we would cut that potato. So you can cut it in squares, you can cut it in 4 in cubes, and that will roughly give you your 1.5 ounces of a potato. When we do this, we want to make sure we're using a very sharp and clean knife. And when I say clean, we're using a 10% bleach solution that cleans that knife. It makes it sterile. And that way, when you make that cut, you're giving it a clean cut with a sterile knife, and also will help to sterilize the potato also a little bit. You do not want to use a serrated knife. Think about a serrated knife. It's got all those jagged edges on it. And when we cut through something, we're sawing with that. That's the whole purpose of it being serrated. And that leaves a lot of rough cuts. And the more nicks and notches that are in your potatoes, it's going to leave more room for disease to get in there. It's going to make it more susceptible to rot. It's also going to allow I'm calling them bad bugs, so that bad bacteria to get into into the plant system. And so we want to make sure we're starting our plants off on the right foot. So we want to make sure that we are trying to use the best solution. We're preparing everything because we do have to cut it. So we want to make sure we're cutting everything in the best manner so that when we are planting them here in the near future, that they are going to have the best life. So we've started them off the best we can. Now, for 100-foot row, and it's a lot of potatoes. That's a long row. Do we have to necessarily have them that long? No. But let's do the 100-foot row. You'll need about 15 pounds of seed potatoes. So remember, you're cutting those up into roughly a square. They don't have to be exact. You just want to make sure that you are getting 2 to 3 eyes as you are cutting up the potatoes. And so when you cut those 15 pounds up, that for each 100-foot row. And when you, well, I'm jumping ahead of myself here. So just, if you're only gonna make a 10-foot row, then you're only going to need a few potatoes. So we're gonna narrow that down. You only need 10-foot row, 2 potatoes, 3 pounds of roughly to get what you need. Once you have cut those potatoes and you have got them ready for seed, you don't have to plant them immediately. And it's probably better off to wait a couple days before you plant them. Or, when you are cutting them, cut them ahead of the time that you want to be cut so that you're going to let them temper for a little bit. You want to keep them in an atmosphere for roughly 3 to 4 days in a dimly lit room. You want it to be have some humidity to it. So basically room temperature is great, but you also want it to be dark. You want it to be able to put some thick skin on itself, and that is going to help prepare it. So we just made these flesh cuts, and so we want those flesh cuts to kind of harden and to put a skin on it so that when we do put it in the soil, that it's not as easily susceptible to soil-borne illnesses or fungus or even rot. Be careful though, because as it is in the dark room for a couple days, you might get sprouts. Now, those sprouts are actually a good thing. So you want to be as gentle with those as possible because you don't want to accidentally break those little sprouts off. When you do plant them, though, make sure the sprouts are pointed up so that they can grow and push through the soil. So now we are going to get our site together. So earlier we talked about full sun and I mentioned well-drained soil. And so we got to find that first. And we just have to make sure that we are adapting our soils or finding that nice loose soil that we have. And a lot of times when we are growing them in our gardens, we have adapted our soil to make sure that we have that loose drain soil, whether it's putting in additional organic matter, whether it's adding in peat moss, adding different amendments in there to help adjust our soil, whether it's the pH level or whether it's to adapt it for the purpose of loosening it up. Poorly drained soils equals poor stands, and you're also going to get low yields. So it doesn't mean that you won't get potatoes. You're just going to not get as good of stand and growth out of them. And then the heavier soils that we have, a lot of times because those heavy soils are putting pressure on the plant as it's growing, doesn't allow the plant tuber to be able to expand and grow. And so then it's a little smaller and rough because they will grow to the size of their container. So even if their container is our earth and our earth is heavy and compacted some, then it's only going to grow to that size. So we are planting, and of course this is a field of potatoes, not just a row. we want to make sure that they are planted in roughly 10 to 12 inch high hills. They are roughly 36 inches apart. And then once we've hilled them up 10 to 12 inches high, then we go back through and we kind of smash it down to make it so it's a 6 to 8 inch high hill. And soil to add as they grow. So we're going to talk about this here in just a second too. So here we have an example of diagram of actually hilling the plants up and keeping it 36 inches apart. So we want to hill our potatoes up, whether you have a tool that you can put behind your equipment that you can do this with, or you just go out in your garden and you use your hoe to help drag your row into a hill, roughly 10 to 12 inches high and 36 inches apart, because it needs to be able to the plant itself to have room to expand. We want to make sure that there's enough airflow, because having plants spread out and having air run through it allows it to be less susceptible to disease and even insects, and then also to help pollinate too. Then once we have it 10 to 12 inches high, we are going to make it flat on top. So that's basically all you're doing is you're flattening it out, but you still want it to remain 6 to 8 inches high. So 10 to 12 inches wide, 6 to 8 inches high in the end. Now that does seem to be fairly wide and deep that we need to be working with. But we are growing potatoes, and we don't just grow one potato from one plant. We're growing multiple potatoes from that root system. So once we have our hill made, then you're going to take the end of your shovel or your end of your hoe, the handle end, or maybe even a good sturdy stick, or down here in our neck of the woods, tobacco sticks. We still have those laying around, and you're going to drag roughly a trench on either side as it shows here. So a shallow trench on either side. Now that shallow trench on either side is going to be down closer to the root level. So you're going to take that down maybe 4 inches. And that's going to be where your fertilizer lays in. And a good example of a fertilizer to start your potatoes out with, because you want a good complete fertilizer, is a 10-20-10. So that's a good starter piece. Then you're going to, down the direct middle of your hilled area, you're going to drag another trench that's roughly 3 inches, because that's how deep you want to plant your potato, and then cover it. So plant your potato 3 inches deep, eyes shooting up. You want the eyes to the sun, and then you want to cover it also. And as I said, you're planting that seed potato about 3 inches down when your fertilizer on the sides. And then you're going to, of course, cover not only the seed potato, but also your fertilizer too. And then water everything in. The another thing to think about is that as it is in that hill, those tubers will dry out. So you want to make sure not only are you keeping that potato dry before we get started, but also we don't want it to be, when you plant it, to be too dry. So you want to make sure that you are watering it. So we've cut it, it's set there for 3 or 4 days, and it's dried out some. Now we've got it in the ground, and we want to make sure that it's got a good water source to it. So make sure that it has water and about a cup of fertilizer for each 30 feet of the row as the root system, or as the plant's growing. Plants should be 6 inches tall when this occurs, so you're giving it an extra dose of fertilizer as it is growing. So this is your side dressing, is what you're doing about when the plant is roughly 6 inches tall. And making sure that it stays, it has enough water supply to it. And a good rule of thumb with watering is, use the tool that you were given and stick your finger into the ground. If you feel moisture, it's good. If you need to add, you're going to know. And you want to make sure that you are just watering it in well as you get started, and then as it continues to grow. And of course, we have the good old Mother Nature that helps us out too. And sometimes a little too much is added at those periods of time, but there's nothing we can do about that. So those hills and the valleys that are there will hopefully help to run that off if we do get too much. And then as the plant is growing, so we've started the hill out 10 inches wide, 10 to 12 inches tall, and then we smashed it down so that we got that flat top on it. But we need to make sure we continue to add to the hill. So as the plant is growing, you're wanting to continue to drag with your hoe more soil up, because that is where the plant system is going to grow. And as the tubers, nodules come out and the potato is growing, the root system is growing up. So we've got the seed product, the seed potato in the ground, the plant is shooting up, but as it has shot up, and what we see above ground is green flourish, while below ground is going to be all these little root systems popping off. And then from those little root systems are going to be potatoes at the end. And so the bigger our plant is on top, most likely that's the more potatoes we have on the underground. And then we just need to make sure we keep hilling it up, because as the plant grows taller, that means there's more root systems coming out. So we want to make sure we keep that hill and adding to it as needed. I jumped ahead of myself here. Keep hilling and watering as we go. And then once the green shoots emerge, hill soil, continue to hill it up as it grows. So here's an example. As we planted the root system down here, and then what I was talking about with the flourish on top, and then the potatoes branching out from each one of the different tubers that is growing from that stem system. So that's why we need to make sure we keep dragging that soil up, because as the plant grows taller, then more potatoes potentially could be growing underground. Now, if we wanted to grow a potato in a bucket, you can do that. You can take, I've even seen where people take old tires and stack them up, and they put a layer of soil in the bottom, and then you put your potato in the second tire, and then you just keep adding to it and stacking them up and adding more soil as the plant grows. Same thing with your container potatoes. So you want to put a little bit of soil in the bottom. Then you want to put your seed potatoes in a 14-inch pot. And I'm using that because that's what this diagram is based off of, is a 14-inch diameter pot. And you can put roughly 4 seed potatoes in there. So it's crowded, but you can make it work. So you want to put 2 to 3 or 3 to 4 potatoes in there, or as many, no more than that. But if you only put 1 in there, you can do that too. And you put a little layer of soil in, put your seed potato in, and then cover it up with that 3 inches. Then as you see it growing in the second picture, you just keep adding more soil until it eventually is growing out of the pot. And then the nice thing is when we go to harvest with the container, all you have to do is dump it out. Whereas we'll talk about how to harvest potatoes here in just a minute for the row. Some things we need to talk about though, and I'm not going to get into detail about this, but your insects, most common ones are going to be the fleet beetle, the Colorado potato beetle, aphids, wireworm, and leaf hoppers. With insects, they're going to happen. And when you see them, you need to take control of them. It's best to, and even with our other diseases we're going to talk about in a second, prevention is the best method for any of them. Once you see the insect, it's more difficult to get rid of. But if you prevent it ahead of time, then it's easier to control. Diseases, though, when we're talking about fungus, once a plant gets a type of fungus, it's very, very difficult to get rid of it. So once again, prevention is the best medicine. So you want to prevent it. And there are some times when our plants get fungal type diseases or soil-borne diseases, and there's nothing we can do for it. Once they've got it, they've got it. So preventing it, making sure that you've got the right environment, you've got the right airflow, and you have used neem oils and sulfurs and things like that to help control those diseases ahead of time, and you are preventing them from getting those types of funguses. You have also chosen the right soil. You have rotated your crops because you want to rotate your crop families for the best prevention of diseases and insects also. So making sure you're doing crop rotation, and yes, vegetable crops have to be rotated. You can't plant the same thing in the same spot of your garden every single year. If you're using a container, you don't want to use the same container each year for the same crop either. You want to clean those out. You want to sanitize them. You want to use a different type of soil. I had a local garden center. They have been growing tomato plants they've been in this garden center business for 50 years. Why I had to tell them this, I don't know, last year, but I said, you have a soil-borne disease in your potted tomatoes. It wasn't their seed pot tomato, the 6-packs. It was the ones they were potting and growing for customers to come by. Those were the ones that were dying off. I said, did you use the same soil last year? Yeah. I said, well, give me the root systems. Let's send it off. They had a nematode in their soil, and after I sent it off to the lab, I said, quit using that to grow your tomatoes in. But keep in mind that plant families, tomatoes and peppers and eggplant, are the same Solanaceae family. So you got to make sure you're rotating the family, not just the type of plant. So ready to harvest. When they are yellow and dying at the top of the greening of the plant. So the plant, the foliage has decided that it's, I'm done growing and it's time for my product to come to surface. So the yellowing dies back. The skin, if you were to reach down in and check one of your potatoes, is going to be firm and it doesn't rub off easily. What we call a new potato are dug up early, and that skin has not thickened on them. So that's why the skin on a new potato rubs off real easy. So you want to harvest your potatoes by going down about 10 to 12 inches and distance from the plant. So height and width of the row that you have there, and digging that out. You can use a spade, you can use a shovel, you can use there's a potato fork, and get down in there and dig those out. And then you're going to pull them from the vine. So that's where I was saying the nice thing about containers is that you can just tip it over and there's your potatoes. Once you have got your potatoes, you want to make sure that they are dry. You can store them for a very long time, but you want to store them in a location that has plenty of air movement. So you want to keep it wants to be at that low moisture and dry and dark. We don't want them to stay in a bright lit location. The other thing is that you've probably heard the old rule of thumb that you don't want to put your potatoes and your onions together because they actually cause each other to ripen much faster. The onions produce a gas that causes potatoes to ripen faster and rot quicker. So keep them in a cool, dry location, and you can usually keep them for roughly 95 to 110 days. So, and if you've got the old food cellars that are even a lot of times underground almost, you can keep them in there for even longer. So I'm going to click here and hope this shows the way it's supposed to. And this is a video from Texas AgriLife talking about the rainbow of potatoes.
Gigi, right now I'm seeing that the window has popped up, but I don't see the window. It's that gray
Okay.
overlay. So you might have to reshare with the YouTube video.
Now do you see it?
Varieties
Yes.
that are adapted specifically to Texas environmental conditions. However, some of our varieties are widely adapted across the U.S. In fact, 3 of them now collectively represent the 5th largest number of acres that are certified for seed in the U.S. So we've released some successful varieties, and we're developing more all the time. We're always interested in new and improved red varieties and improved russet varieties, but there are some other types that have become more interesting lately. For one is small potatoes, such as you see right here. There's a company called Tasteful Selections that we're working with and developing improved varieties of potatoes that have heavy set of small potatoes. One of the reasons for the popularity of this is, but with both spouses working, the amount of time required to prepare potatoes becomes an issue with some people. With the small potatoes, they can be microwaved very fast and be on the table in a hurry. In addition, they're quite tasty as well. So it's not only the smalls. We're looking at reds with yellow flesh and white flesh with purples and different colors. In addition, potato consumption in the U.S. has generally declined somewhat, and that's been from the traditional potatoes. And what we're doing now is developing unique varieties, such as you see appearing here, that appeal to people. They have a tendency to appeal to the younger set that is high income, that are willing to try something different. And this has contributed to somewhat of an increase in consumption of this type over the russets. The russets are still the standard, and as are the reds. But these specialty potatoes, this particular one has the red flesh with splashes of yellow, and it's yellow fleshed as well. So specialty, these are referred to as sometimes as gourmet or specialty potatoes, and that's receiving more and more emphasis. We're going to be releasing a new russet variety here this year that looks to be very successful. With the tubers that I'm displaying here are different selections that we've made, and these two in this hand are yellow fleshed, and they have compounds contained in them that are health producing, antioxidants. So in addition to having a unique appearance, which some of the young millenniums seem to like, they also are healthier potatoes to eat. Potatoes are a real important delivery system for important nutrients, human nutrients, because the potatoes are consumed 113 pounds per capita in the U.S. So if we can make the potato more healthy, we can help to make the population healthier. This is a purple flesh, as you can see, and purple skin with yellow flesh, and that appeals to some people as well. So in this case, we have a red skin with a yellow flesh. So the different varieties have expanded the potato consumption in that area, and helps to compensate for the decrease in consumption of the russet type potatoes.
Welcome everybody to our virtual Day in the Woods program on native trees and shrubs for wildlife. And
Well,
we'll move on from there.
now I've got another video going.
Wonderful. Thank you.
We're on our way back to
There you go.
PowerPoint, it looks like.
Yeah.
Although Dave Apsley's videos are wonderful and everyone should check those out as well.
Okay, so one thing I forgot to tell you while I'm bringing this back up here, is I forgot to tell you how far apart to space your seeds. So when you space your seed potatoes out, and I remember doing this as a kid, I mean, at that point in time, I probably did it with, I had to go 2 feet is what Dad would tell me to do because my feet were smaller. But roughly 10 to 12 inches apart is where you want to plant the seeds. So I did mention earlier to make sure that the eyes are pointing towards the sun, but I forgot to tell you how far apart to put them. So basically, it's 10 to 12 inches. I actually got a ruler down and measured my foot of what it is. So my foot now is roughly 10 inches. So every step that I would take, I'd put it right in front of my toe and be at that 10 to 12 inch mark. So depending on how big your foot is, depends on how far apart you could use that as a measurement. So that is what I have in, oh, I went too far. The gentleman from Texas AgriLife was talking about nutrition with our potatoes, and potatoes are one of the most versatile food products that we can have, and they are very nutritious. What makes them not nutritious is everything that we add to them. So if we could eat our potatoes with just a potato, just as it is, I mean, using them in smaller portions. So when we're talking about eating a potato that is nutritious, we're talking about eating roughly a 5-ounce potato. So the size of your fist. But think about the ones we normally get when you go to the store or when you go out to dinner. They're either twice that size or sometimes even bigger. They're huge. So making sure you're just doing it in the right portion control, keeping it in a small portion and not adding all those extra things to it. So when I fry my potatoes, and yes, I did fry some up this morning, but I fry them in lard. And I fried them with an onion, and it's put a little bit of, I use steak seasoning on mine, or you can use salt and pepper. And that's all I'll put on it. I won't put sour cream. I won't put cheese. I won't put all that stuff on it. Just eat it the way it is. Frying them in butter is better than cooking them in margarine. So it's that deep fry aspect. So that French fry grease, the hash browns, when it's made into those products, that's a lot of times when we ruin the nutritional factor of our potatoes. So now we should have time for questions and sharing of recipes. So I'm going to stop sharing and come back to you guys so I can see you.
Thank you, Gigi. Yeah, this is a great time now. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat or you can unmute and ask. And if you have a favorite potato recipe, feel free to share as well. I also have a poll that I'm going to launch, and I'd love to see your feedback on this poll. I'll do that here in a little bit. Phil has already put a question in the chat. Is it okay to eat raw potatoes?
Yeah, you can eat raw potatoes. I don't think they're as flavorful, but you can. It's no different than eating a raw carrot or anything like that.
I have just launched the poll for our audience. I'd like to gather your feedback here so we know the experience level of our audience and how we might be able to help you into the future as you're looking for additional resources or planning programs in the future. Karen asks, how many seed pieces should be planted in each hill?
So you put one seed piece, and then that's what I was saying. You plant your one seed piece and then go 10 to 12 inches and plant another one. So if you've got a 100-foot row, is what we were talking about earlier, you're going to have, and we needed roughly 15 pounds to make that 100-foot row. So you start at your beginning, and then every foot you're going to put a seed potato. So then 100-foot row every 10 inch. I'm not doing the math quickly this morning, sorry. One seed every 10 to 12 inches. And I don't know if you guys fixed breakfast this morning, but I did. Got my fried taters waiting for me for when I'm finished.
I was going to say one of my favorite ways to cook potatoes is to use red potatoes and do potatoes O'Brien, which is what we always called it. I used to work in a bakery at a grocery store where we'd do hot dishes for lunch. And potatoes O'Brien was always a favorite. It was just red potatoes with peppers, onions, and some type of a smoked sausage, kielbasa, cut into chunks and all just fried in the same pan. Made a nice little sauce with the the water from the peppers, add a little bit of butter to it to keep it from sticking to the pan. And that was always popular and just so easy. I also like to do that with leftover ham. But I do have to add a little extra moisture to the pan, but we really like potatoes O'Brien.
Can you plant the
Dwayne?
peelings under lawn grass? Neighbor always did that and had great luck. You talking about the peelings from your food grade potatoes or ones from seed potatoes? Because the peelings from your food grade potatoes, I mean, yes, you might get plants from it, but they're probably not going to be as strong and sturdy of plants. But your ones from your food grade, and the fact that it's the skin, I think is going to, I mean, great for him that he had good luck, but I'm just thinking that you need that, you got to have that golf ball size. You got to have some meat, so to speak, to your seed potato to be able to have, because that's allowing some nutrients for that plant to go ahead and kickstart and get going, and then it's drawing from the nutrient of itself before it gets its root system out into the soil to be able to pull nutrients from there.
We have another question about composting. Can you compost potato peelings?
Yes. Yes, you can use potato peelings in your compost. Just as long as it doesn't have all that butter and grease on them, because you don't want to put that into your compost pile.
I hope that you could get the gist from the poll, that we hope that you learned something really helpful today. And if you have questions about growing your potatoes in the garden this year, we hope you'll contact us at Extension. We'd love to help you, whether that's with scouting for diseases or pests, or making sure your area is prepped right. If you run into an issue, we're here to help, and this is our job, is to help you, not to sell you plants or other garden products or pesticides or herbicides. We genuinely want you to get a good potato harvest. No other underlying motives here. So feel free to contact us. Everything that we give you advice on will be research-based. And so there's absolutely nothing wrong with consulting the garden center or your friends or neighbors, or even giving Google a try, but we hope that you'll use us as a resource as well to make sure the information you're gathering is accurate and locally applicable too.
And what I'll do, Christine, because I didn't get my works cited page on there, but I will update that and then send you the PowerPoint, and then you can send it out to the group so that they have it with that list of resources. But I did get my information from Texas AgriLife, which is their extension resource, Minnesota, North Dakota State University, and some from North Carolina, and of course, a little bit from Ohio too, from OSU.
Thank you. We have a couple of more questions that came in, Gigi. We did answer Karen's first question about how many potatoes to put in the hill. Karen then also asked, what fungicide do you recommend to treat seed pieces?
So the fungicide to treat the seed pieces, you really don't want to use any true fungicide at that point. You can use just that bleach mix to help sanitize it. So it's like a 1 to 10. You can either spray it or dip them quickly, but then lay them out to dry. So yeah, 1 seed piece per hill. But remember, your hill could be 10 foot long. So within that 10-foot length, you're going to plant 1 seed, go 10 inches further down, plant another one, 10 inches further down and plant another one. In a container though, you could plant them a little closer together. So as I said, in a 14-inch container, you only want to put a maximum of 4. Of course, the bigger your container, you could put more. Like somebody mentioned a garbage can.
I see Dwayne says here in the chat that he quit growing potatoes because of potato beetles. He had a hard time controlling them. What's everybody else's experiences this far with potatoes? I personally haven't really grown potatoes at home just because knowing that my soil's conditions were not really conducive for tubers to thrive. I've just avoided them and just bought them. You know, potatoes aren't very expensive. They're usually good quality, and we do have local farmers market vendors who will sell potatoes. So we've had the ability to choose from multiple sources that were easier than growing them at home, just because of that soil texture issue is a limiting factor at our house.
It's a limiting factor here too. I think we have about the same Appalachian lovely soil.
Yeah, and then Phil says the soil is too hard later in the season. It's hard to dig up your harvest later.
Yeah.
Celeste says she's used a tractor tire before.
Yeah, I've seen where people have taken tires and stacked them. And so as the plant is growing, they just keep stacking and adding more soil. And then when it's all said and done, they kick them over. And then you can easily get your potatoes.
Gigi, do you have any recommendations for after harvest for the home gardener to store their potatoes?
Well, that's what I was talking about in the towards the end, is that you want to make sure you're putting it in a cool, dry, dark location. So someplace that doesn't have a lot of humidity to it, whether it's a utility room, if you've got a basement, you could put it down into. So you really want to grow what you can store. So think about that too, or what you're going to use. You don't want to grow too much that you don't have a use for the product. But remember, there's preserving them too. So you could talk to your FCS educator and figure out a safe canning method for your potatoes too.
Gina says her hard soils produced low yield. Any soil amendment suggestions to loosen it more quickly versus slowly over many years?
So you can, there's different things like peat moss. Oh, I wish I could think of what the name of the soil amendment is. It looks like little itty bitty wood chips. But it's a soil amendment and it helps to loosen your soil particles up. So I got some for our demonstration garden at the extension office a couple years ago because it was hard as a rock. But it's very fine, almost wood chip like shavings that's used as a soil amendment. I mean, when I say tiny, I'm talking just little bitty shavings, quarter inch or
I
so
would
or
definitely
less.
caution people about, a lot of people have probably heard that you could add sand to
Yeah,
clay
that'll
textured
harden it
soils.
up.
It's almost like mixing concrete.
Concrete, yeah.
Yeah. So you need the addition of organic matter, something that's going to degrade over time. It's true that sand has the best infiltration rate, but when it binds to the other particles in the soil, you just wind up with an extremely hard to work with situation, probably worse than what you had in the beginning. So sand is not the fix in that case. Definitely want something with organic qualities to it, and then you can reevaluate year to year on how much you need to add as it degrades.
So you can, if you've got local horse farms or places like that where you can go out and get some organic matter from them that has been set in a pile and naturally decomposing for a period of time, do that. You don't want to necessarily put in anything that is fresh because that will, it's not as good, won't help break down. It's still going to take a long time to break down. So you want to get something that's already in the process of breaking down and has went through a so-called fermentation process. I like to say it's cooked a little, it's cooked its way through.
Yeah, you want some cooked manure.
Right. But you could add that in also, and that will help too. But you also want to pay attention that you don't put that in consistently and all the time. And you do a soil sample to check, because if you put in too much manure compost, you can raise your phosphorus levels too high, and that will cause problems with any of the vegetables that you're trying to grow.
Any additional questions for Gigi this morning? We're at 9:30 right now, and that's usually our stopping point. Gigi, thank you so much for joining us this morning to cover the potato topic. It's definitely timely. Tomorrow is the first day of spring. We've made it. Yay! Let's all rejoice together. I definitely have some plans to start doing some garden prep. I want to get some early things planted. Started some things in the windowsill already, and just really looking forward to things greening up. As things green up, my mood goes up, and I think that's the case for many of us.
Oh, another container I just thought of. And we're doing this tomorrow. And the reason I think of that is I'm meeting with the master gardeners tomorrow, and we're working on our demonstration garden because we are building a straw bale garden this year. One of my master gardeners does this at her house every year. You can
Cool.
plant potatoes in a straw bale and they'll grow that way too. Another
I
type
have a
of
book about
container.
straw bale gardening at the extension office. If any of you Noble County natives would like to borrow that from me, I'd be happy to share. It's pretty cool. You do have to supply the nutrients to the plants since they're just there in the straw. But really cool. Don't use hay, use straw. The hay will sprout.
And clean. You need to make sure it's
Clean.
weed clean. You don't want
Right.
seeds in there.
But very, very interesting idea for those of us with challenging soil to work with. It's almost like having a raised bed, but you didn't have to haul the soil material in. Okay, well, thanks so much, Gigi. I hope that we've inspired some of you with ideas for the garden this coming year. And as always, please reach out if you have questions, comments. We're continuing to do our Farm Talk breakfast once a month into the future. Hopefully, we will be able to go back to an in-person format very soon. But until we're able to have breakfast together with each other again, we'll likely stay here on the Zoom platform. So our next Farm Talk breakfast is going to be on April 16th. The topic will be announced soon, and we hope to see you then. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Have a good day.